Okay, so I guess it's 8:45. Welcome to my talk. I'm Piotr Król, and I would like to introduce you to Dasharo, open source firmware distribution. So I'm founder of 3M, Poland-based consulting company, which specializes in embedded firmware. So mostly open source BIOS, but also embedded Linux. I'm also an instructor in open security training, which are some fancy free stuff which I will advertise at the end. So maybe first, like short exercise. How many of you know this logo? Raise your hand. Whoa, almost no one. So there are two people knowing what's coreboot. So coreboot is open source firmware alternative to BIOS. And maybe you don't know, but every Chromebook's running coreboot. So this is the BIOS for every Chromebook. So maybe it would be easier with this one. How many of you know this logo? Ever seen this logo? Also, not many. So, there are a little bit more. So this is UEFI. UEFI Forum is an organization which defines specification for interaction between BIOS and operating system. And based on this specification, there is implementation maintained by organization on GitHub, which is called TianoCore, and they do reference implementation of BIOS. So there is like huge C code base, which you can use to develop BIOS for your computer, for your device. So I guess it would be harder further because those are even more niche projects. This is, who knows this logo? No one. So this is Linux boot. So this is very interesting project, open source firmware project, where Ron Minich, creator of coreboot, decided to put a Linux inside the SPI chipset of the computer. So you don't use, when you're putting a power on your device, there is no BIOS, or there is little bit of BIOS, but then immediately Linux kernel starts. So why he did that? Because he assumed there is no need to write the drivers twice. Typically on the system, one set of drivers is in BIOS and then of course another in your operating system. So he said, like, why I should write drivers twice? I will reuse Linux kernel drivers in BIOS for initialization of the system. And last logo is maybe very niche project, but very interesting. It's very security focused. It's HEADS. So this is like a coreboot downstream distribution, very specific, using hardcore cryptography, GPG, USB token for checking integrity of the firmware. So I really encourage you to Google for coreboot HEADS, and you will find GitHub repository, and you can read about this really secure firmware distribution. So what I will talk about is Dasharo. Dasharo is another downstream distribution of coreboot made by 3M, by my company. And the goal of Dasharo is to provide open development, firmware resilience, platform security focused distribution with UEFI interface. So any modern operating system can boot based on that. So how the status of the project look like and what kind of impact Dasharo already made? So first of all, so we already merged to coreboot upstream like 16,000 lines of code. This is maybe not much, but another 20,000 is in progress. And we also got a power port, which is like 50,000 lines of code, which also will need a merge. So in case of hardware compatibility, it's also like we beginning. We have 17 platforms supported right now. There are 5 another which are in progress. We already released like over 500 releases. We run over 40,000 tests on those releases. All the tests are published. All the source code is published, so you can build those images, you can flash those. But we also provide the binaries, which you can immediately use on supported platforms. In case of market share of the devices, we support IBM Power 9, especially the Raptor computing Talos platform. We did quite a lot of Intel, but the most of stuff we did is for AMD, especially for firewalls from Switzerland, from a company called PC Engines. In case of community, we have a community of over 250 people. There is around, the communication channel is on Matrix. There is around 2,000 messages a month, so not much. But if you are interested, you can join and see how this move on. We were highlighted by news release in various places. So Tom's Hardware wrote about us when we did the port for MSI Z690. There are a bunch of other medias. Phoronix likes us very much. So Phoronix is like a open source news media outlet. So they like what we're doing very much. So there is a lot of stuff. PC Gamer wrote about us. So you can see that this is not only some unknown niche project, but there is some impact and we are growing. I wanted to show you a comparison between various distributions. I guess the most important are two last lines. So maybe let's go through columns first. The rows are the various open source firmware, you can say distributions, or not open source firmware, because the row here is like closed source, BIOS vendor, proprietary stuff. Yeah. So maybe let's start with the first column. It's about openness. So the question is if the source code for my BIOS is open, and you can see that typically your source code for your BIOS on your computer is not open, and you typically don't know exactly what you're dealing with. There may be malicious code there may be malware, there may be bugs which are not fixed. There may be like outdated microcode, which cause that you are vulnerable to various meltdown spectre-like bugs. But anyway, so that's what's different for the typical vendor BIOS. Then the question is, if in given projects you can get binaries, or this is just source code and you have to compile yourself and you have to deal with the toolchain problems and all the technical difficulties which are related to building something. Yeah. So in most cases you get the binaries. The difference is with the coreboot. Coreboot is just it's like Linux. Like Linux provide source code. It does not provide binaries. Distributions provide binaries. Yeah. So yeah. So the point here is that the coreboot does not provide binaries. You have to compile it yourself. You have to decide what options you're choosing while compiling. The next thing is public long-term support. So the question is if the platforms which were enabled in this project will be supported for long term, or they will be dropped. So most of the distributions have long-term support because they support like even over 10 years old hardware. But in case of coreboot, they have policy that if there is old platform which cause problems for further development, they just make a branch and just move on, like remove that platform from the head of tree in their repository. This happened multiple times. And of course, like in case of vendor BIOS, you never know. Typically, consumer hardware got like maybe 2 years updates of BIOS, maybe 3 years. The server hardware from serious companies may get like way longer support, but that's it. Maybe industrial embedded stuff may get longer support, but typically you're not getting long support for BIOS from BIOS vendor. In case of commercial support, some may need commercial support for the BIOS. So Heads got it. LibreBoot, I didn't find the information on the website, but I guess if you will call them, then probably they will provide. In case of coreboot, there's dedicated website where you're going to coreboot.org and you have like consulting, you're going there, there are a list of companies which will support you. In case of vendor BIOS, it depends, but mostly yes, you will get commercial support. But the point is, if you are a small vendor or individual, like unlikely. You have to be reasonably big to get that support. And with Dasharo, you're getting the support. In case of public community size, definitely Heads and LibreBoot, which are maybe not so well known here, already have quite established community, which is reasonably big. Coreboot has huge community in comparison to Heads, LibreBoot, or Dasharo. Vendor BIOS, like you can go to forums of various vendors, but there is like some small group, like I don't know, 50 people who are interested in the BIOS modifications or doing something with BIOS. So yeah, so typically it is small and do not last long. And Dasharo is growing, so I would say it's between the vendor BIOS and the heads. Going further, transparent validation. So the question is, what was validated? So sometimes you're getting BIOS update and there was very descriptive release notes. Performance improvements, bug fixes, something like that, which is like not saying anything. So with Dasharo, you're getting transparent validation. So you exactly get information. This test was executed with this procedure, and the result is that. If there is a bug, there is a link to bug on GitHub, and everything is transparent and open, and you can check it. With Heads and LibreBoot, they have a small testing community. This is not backed by big organizations. So that means they typically rely on, like, if bug pop up, there is GitHub issue and they discussing there. There is no formal testing and there is no transparent validation, like a list, what was validated on given release. With coreboot, there are no binary release, so there is nothing to validate. And with vendor BIOS, sometimes there are some tests, especially there are hardware compatibility lists published, but you don't know really what they validate, what operating systems they validated, which version, which service pack, and so on and so on. With Dasharo, you get that. In case of validation scope, how big is this test scope? How many tests they running? Yeah. I guess like with heads, like very minimal. The heads running themselves. There is CI which do the builds. Then with LibreBoot, I guess there is a little bit less. With coreboot, there is just building. There is CI which do the just builds, nothing else. So if not building, they consider this is broken. If building, they not test anything else. Yeah. With vendor BIOS, they validate a lot. They have huge labs, they have a lot of various hardware, and they can really do a lot of validation, but they do not provide the results of that validation. So that's the problem. And with Dasharo, we have like quite a lot of tests. For some platforms, we have even 500 tests, and we're still growing. In case of NDA docs, so non-disclosure agreement documentation, which means access to the silicon vendor documentation, which give you ability to fix potential problems with BIOS or report problems related to hardware. So yeah, so typically for heads, developers do not get that because they don't sign, and LibreBoot, they don't sign NDA. Coreboot, some developers are working for corporations, so they have access. Of course, vendor BIOS have access, 3MDEP and Dasharo got access. In case of size of public documentation, like most of the projects got very little, UEFI vendors, proprietary vendors got very little documentation. You can go to docs.dasharo.com and see how much documentation we have. We have like tremendous big documentation, a lot of information you can find there. So that's the comparison. So I wanted to pitch you quickly about something which is called Dasharo Trust Root. So essentially, there is a mechanism of making the platform booting only the firmware that you want. So signed by you. And that's typically what Lenovo or any HP, Dell, any OEM doing. They create blow a fuses in the processor with the public key, so no other firmware can be booted, only theirs. Yeah. So we have also this possibility for those who want it. Those fuses are here in some silicon vendor technology deep inside the silicon. That means typically that those fuses are used by something what is called management engine or platform security processor on the AMD. It could be BMC on server platforms. It could be boot ROM on ARM platforms. And then from that, the root of trust starts of the platform. And the boot process continue. It can continue through various means. Through firmware, which could be Dasharo, coreboot, TianoCore, I don't know, U-boot, trusted firmware, and then of course pass the control to the operating system. This is logo of Zarhus, the other project that we're doing, and of course in operating system you're doing what you want with your technology, with C, Rust, Go, whatever. Okay, so you may ask, okay, this is all open source, and so how you earn money, yeah? So what's your business model? So the business model is like quite complex, like on this diagram, but essentially for Dasharo there are three main streams. The entry subscription, so this is subscription-based model. Someone can pay us to get the binaries to their email. Of course, the code is open, so they can compile themselves. So it's up to them if this is waste of their time or this is like okay for them. Someone can buy support package or there are dedicated products which going to customers. Okay, I get information that I should end. So let me give you this slide. If you want to buy Dasharo, those are links. Slides will be published by the organizers. This is my contact. If you want to talk with me, please free to reach me out. And I wanted to give you some free stuff. So this is free stuff. So with Zino Kovach, former Apple security engineer, who was responsible for secure boot of MacBook Pro M1, he created this portal for free education, free security education. So if you go to POST2 FYI, you will get free trainings, and various of them are very low level. So this is x86 architecture, coreboot, UEFI, debuggers. So you can learn a lot from that for free, and then get a job. And if you want to work for us, feel free to send CV to us. There is a website dedicated, 3mdev.com/careers. You can check what kind of position we have open, and that would be it from my side. Thank you very much.